This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas.
Good morning, True Seekers and True Crime Junkies. Welcome back to another week of Hit the Road, Jack, Finding the Zodiac. This week, we are going to step back into the Lake Berryessa murders or attacks, and we're going to go through some of the evidence, and we're going to hear from Bryan Hartnell. I'm going to start, obviously, with our YouTube comment, I think, of the year. It's a very astute position, and he began by asking about Jack from the Dennis Kaufman documentary. I'm not sure if he actually has watched the podcast, but I have referred him to that so that he can kind of see what's going on, maybe answer some of his questions. One of the questions he asked at first was, what other murders did he do? Now, of course, we know I have a whole lot going on in this presentation where I state that there is a plausibility that the Zodiac has a string of murders all across the United States. And so with that, I explained what I believed to be some connected crimes that should be looked at. His response was, it's common parlance, yes. Many suspects have a very similar MO in the hunt. You need a smoking gun. How does the cryptograms reveal your suspect? Are the cryptograms rubbish? Your superpositioning of the Z symbol is interesting. If your theory is true, you need to convince the right people. Many have dedicated lives to the crime. If your theory is correct and the feds don't give up nor PD info needed, is there involvement? And if so, why? I'm hoping to answer some of those questions by the time we get to the end of the presentation. And I mean the end, not today. But I did respond and I said, I'm definitely enjoying your line of questioning. It challenges my knowledge and asks questions people just don't seem to care about. Butterfield and Orange Shack, who claim to have recently solved the 340, except for some of the areas, claim that the last two symbols of that cipher reveal the suspect in the documentary, The Hunt for the Zodiac. I concur. Look at the last two symbols, which are the anchor type symbol followed by the plus symbol. The symbol that is the anchor style has always been Jack's monogram in my mind. It just fits perfectly. I mean, when you look at it, it is a J, it is a T, and it is a W. So it has all three, just like you would expect to see on somebody's towel in a bathroom. I believe that the plus sign could be an indicator for being junior or the second, because he was in fact born J.W. Terrence Jr. So it was just a thought, but the coincidence is uncanny on top of the handwriting match. And we've also found, obviously, Jack's name in other anagrams and solves thus far. And we're going to see that more and more as we step into more of the communications and we hear from Harriet Suchet on her solves. So I don't necessarily back any of the solves, but it's always interesting to see how they come up with it. And it appears as though through an anagram of the Sergeant Lynch letter, we saw Harriet Suchet reveal what the killer was attempting to do by submitting a code key to a cipher that had already been solved. I mean, the Hardens had already killed it. They had it by August 8th, and by August 9th, it was in the newspapers. And then for some reason on August 10th, we see the Dear Sergeant, or the Sergeant Lynch letter pop up, which had always brought to question, obviously, I asked it in the last couple of weeks, why the Zodiac would feel the need to send in a code key when it had been solved. Well, she kind of answered that for us last week by showing us that he was attempting to put all three pieces together and then lay that over the top of the letters, and it's being used as a grill cipher, which she has done, she believes, successfully for many years now, and we're going to continue with each and every letter and every solve that she has, because one gets more interesting than the last. His response, obviously, to this was, I certainly follow crime. The Zodiac is one of those things I come back to in contemplation. When you have read or studied much, then my perspective becomes regenerative. I enjoy seeing new things. I don't have the answer, just speculation, of course. I tend to think it's bigger than assumed. I think he's correct. Yet, in my humble opinion, the killer is ritualistic. The killer is deeply ingrained in the esoteric things and not just happenstance. I believe that as well. The killer left a trail. I agree. I, however, think everyone has missed it. You could be correct. I'm not sure which party thinks I'm correct on, but I need to study more. Moreover, my opinion is that the suspect is still eluding the frame, which, of course, I will ask what he means by that, because I don't want to necessarily assume that he is saying that Jack doesn't fit the frame, because everything that we've seen so far about Jack says that he fits the frame. Anywho, let's get right back into the Lake Berryessa attacks. We're going to throw this presentation up. Oh, let's get over here. And there we go. All right. So right after the attacks, we had the killer drive away back to Napa on Main Street. I actually happen to be from Napa. I grew up in Napa from the time of, I want to say, about 4 years old until I was about 18, and I moved out to the Sacramento area. So I'm very familiar with this car wash. And it was a phone booth next to the Napa car wash on Main Street that the killer decided to make that phone call to the police department, letting him know of the crime. Now, I did find on one of the websites this telephone, obviously looking like the phone is off the hook here. It says edited version of the real payphone, which was a question mark in my mind, because what's edited about it? I mean, what are we not looking at for it to be true? Why would you not just pick an image that was true? I'm not sure, and it says, and how it was left by the Zodiac killer after making his call to report his crime. And this is kind of where they made that connection between, well, another connection, because obviously the Zodiac killer is already taking credit for other crimes. But in Blue Rock Springs, just under 3 months previous to this particular crime in Lake Berryessa, there was a phone call to report the Blue Rock Springs murders. And it says, I wish to report a double murder. If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to a public park, you will find the kids in a brown car. They have been shot by a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye. Now, of course, they said that he kind of drew out that word goodbye by saying goodbye in some really strange fashion, but definitely it's a taunt. It's a fear factor. I'm sure he knew when he actually called in off of the Main Street payphone. He says, I want to report a murder. No, a double murder. So the linguistics are very similar. He says they are 2 miles north of park headquarters. Now, this brings me back to Jack's common knowledge of park rangers, parks, campsites, remote locations, being able to determine exactly how far he is from one point to the next, or what his latitude and longitude is, through the methods that Dennis told us about when he used to go camping with Jack and be dropped off in the middle of the woods and have to find his way back to the campsite by way of positioning or finding his location through a radio. Now, the fact that he continues with this MO of quoting specifics tells you that he is very familiar with the area. And that, I think, comes from the hunting ability and the locationing ability that we know Jack had. He followed the statement about where they were by saying they were in a white Volkswagen Carmagia, and after a brief pause, uttered the words, I'm the one that did it. And then he left the receiver off of the hook. So that brings us to an article that I found in regards to the voice. So we know that there was a prank call to a TV show from a Napa State Hospital. Of course, they were able to determine that the person who was making those prank calls, and he made many, many prank calls, was not the Zodiac. But I was more interested in what those who are, or the people who had heard the Zodiac's voice or believed that they had heard the Zodiac's voice, and had done a comparison to the sound of the voice that came on the radio station or the TV show. And they all actually thought it was not the same person because the sound of the voice was much older and deeper. And that kind of boggled me a little bit, because to hear that meant, I mean, much older. Those words in itself does not seem to fit with the identification of the voice recollection that Bryan Hartnell gave, where he indicated that the killer would be somewhere in his between 20 and 30. That's not much older. I mean, if Bryan Hartnell is 18, 19, 20, 26 to 30 is not considered much older in that realm. So I'm going to read this article for you real quick, just so you can hear what it was these individuals had to say. That wasn't Zodiac, say three who know. That voice on a TV show Wednesday morning wasn't Zodiac's, one of the mystery killer's intended victims said yesterday. Bryan Hartnell told Napa County homicide detectives he remembers Zodiac's voice as being much older and deeper than the one heard in the series of telephone calls to KGO TV. So that begs where his mindset was in regards to the age of the individual or the suspect who was attacking him. It says his opinion was backed up by Napa Police Patrolman David Slate and Vallejo Police Clerk Nancy Slover, who have also heard the real killer's voice when Zodiac called their departments to report 2 of his murder attacks. Police, however, still aren't sure, whether the real Zodiac called the Oakland Police Department at 1 a.m. Wednesday to set up the program in which he said he wanted to talk to a lawyer. So now there is some question as to whether or not, and I'm not sure why. I would think that being the freshest phone call and the closest in time frame to the instance of a phone call asking for the attorney, and then the follow-up with the individual who was making the prank calls the next day. How could they not be sure? How is it that they don't recall whether or not that voice is the same? They were the closest in time frame, obviously. So moving on from that, after just following up with the car itself. This is another thing that I've been talking about, the caution of what you find on the internet and what you're looking at and what is helping to either skew people's ideas or thoughts about this case and the evidence involved is things like this. So this picture right over here is a remake, basically, of the Karmagia. I found it on a website, zodiacciphers.com, which tends to be a very, very intriguing website. It has lots of information, and they actually run down theories. I was just a little disappointed to see this image, because right away I knew that was not the car door that was in Police Impound. And nowhere around this picture or in that segment of the website could I find anything that indicated that this was a reenactment of that particular vehicle. So people get in there, they grab this thing up, and they think they're looking at actual evidence, and in fact it is not. So you want to find any pictures that you can with these checkerboard floors beneath it, because this is the actual door that is in Police Impound. This is the one the handwriting has been done on, and this is the one that has identified the Zodiac as being connected to the other 2 crimes. Now, in the information that he left, obviously on the door, we had some consistencies between other communications. One of them happened to be the Black Dahlia, where he wrote also the date and the time on his particular card, saying that he was going to turn himself in. So we have an abbreviated month, we have the date, and then we have a hyphen 69 and then a hyphen at 6:30. Of course, we did not have any hyphens down here, but we do have hyphens in Black Dahlia, so we know that that is something that is being used by both suspects. Now, It gives the dates of the previous murders. Again, he likes to give his proof. He wants everybody to know what he's responsible for. It was written to Vallejo, and it showed the 2 previous dates, as I'd indicated, in describing the crime by knife. The bleeding knife letter and the Halloween card both talk about by knife. So we know again that there is going to be that connection between the communications of the Fairfield letters and the Halloween card to Paul Avery. I did actually find where a fingerprint expert was examining the fingerprints from the phone booth. And that's more evidence. Obviously, we know that is sitting out there as a possible connection, and that Jack's thumbprint should be compared to any question prints found on the phone booth. I found it a little interesting that there was this composite drawing to me that looked really close to the second suspect seen at Lake Berryessa. So I wanted to blow that up and see how that compared, because that obviously is the initial composite, and it appears as though they've elaborated on composites thereafter. But here we're going to go into some of the information that Bryan Hartnell had shared, and this is the first description actually by both Bryan Hartnell and Cecelia Shepard before she passed away. So this is both of them speaking at Lake Berryessa. It said he had a dark hood over his entire head and shoulders, and on the front of the hood at approximately the center of the chest. So that would mean that not only did it come down to the shoulders, but it had to have carried on down to at least the middle of the chest, because that's where the Zodiac symbol appeared, and that would indicate that the hood itself was longer than the middle of the chest, because that's where the symbol was. Now, it appeared to have dark glasses, and a portion of brown hair was observed through the eye openings in the hood. Deputy Collins advised the victims, a male and a female, told him they had been laying on a blanket near the shoreline, the girl with her head on the boy's lap, and when they noticed the subject approached them wearing a dark hood over his entire head and shoulders, and on the front of the hood at approximately the center of the chest was a crosshair symbol. The victims reported the subject appeared to have dark glasses on, and a portion of brown hair was observed through the eye openings in the hood. Now, this should have ruled out Arthur Lee Allen from the beginning. The man was bald, so there was no possible way that brown hair would have been showing through the eye holes. And the logic behind some individuals, I just received another YouTube comment last week forwarding me to a book that they claim that Cheney and Allen is claimed in that book as being cohorts, I guess, in the crimes, which I thought was interesting, because if you can't pin it on one, then there must be an accomplice, and then that way it helps you kind of to weasel your way around or between things. I definitely believe that the Zodiac killer is responsible for the murders himself, and that he, at least in these 7 crimes, that he was not with an accomplice, and that there was not 2 suspects that were seen by these victims. Now, Bryan Hartnell's first description at the hospital was that he appeared to be heavyset, between 200 to 250 pounds, dark clothing, dark jacket, and dark pants. Gun was an automatic pistol in a black holster, and that the knife was a long knife with a black handle in a sheath that appeared to be homemade. So we go back and forth. Sometimes I see that they're writing a bayonet. Well, a bayonet is not a homemade knife. A bayonet is a military knife. Let me see if we can find anything else, but stabbed him with a long knife, stated the gun was black, holster, black handle, and appeared to be homemade. Okay, so that's the first description of the knife from Bryan Hartnell. In the second description, the following day, after he had recovered a little bit, because he was extremely groggy the first time he was interviewed, this one was done with Officer John Robertson, second interview of Bryan Hartnell, and this is the description he gave. Wearing a black hooded mask, cloth covering entire head and shoulders, coming down almost to the suspect's waist. So there we have the actual length of the hood, which, as I had indicated, must be longer than chest level. Victim stayed on the front of the 4-cornered type mask, similar to a paper bag in style. There was a symbol, the symbol described as white, approximately 3 by 3 inches in diameter, with a symmetrical cross. Now, of course, this is what is in the report. This is the perception of the individual, but we do not know what it is that they are giving us as actual evidence in regards to the hood, because there's got to be things that they're going to withhold so that they can determine who is a copycat or who is trying to take credit for something they didn't do. Either way, on the eyelets of the mask was a pair of clip-on sunglasses. In Dennis Kaufman's hood, you can see the holes where those clip-on glasses were, or where the clip-ons were attached over the top of the glasses that were worn beneath the hood. Hair seen through the eyelets observed as dark brown, lightweight windbreaker, dark blue or black pleated slacks, old-fashioned type, he said. That makes the person older. I mean, honestly speaking, if I looked at someone's dress, most people are dressing within their era, and we know that they keep repeating in this particular instance that the Zodiac killer appeared to have been dressed in older fashioned, either military style clothing or slacks. 20 to 30 years of age by voice concept. Well, now we hear him based on that last article that the voice that was heard on KGO TV was too young, that the suspect was actually much older with a much deeper voice. So we can now rule out the 20 to 30 years of age by voice concept that Hartnell had described. He indicated he was 5'8" to 6 foot, 225 to 250 pounds, dark brown hair, sloppy dresser, stomach hanging over the trousers, spoke with some type of drawl, moderate in sound, not high or low pitched, sounded uneducated but not illiterate. And I'm not sure if that drawl is just the way he, how the cadence and how he elongated words like goodbye. Was he capable of continuing that ruse and speaking that way, or was that his natural voice? Now, that brings us to the hood as described by Hartnell. I threw this up. This was the actual hooded picture that was placed in the newspapers after the description had been given to, it looks like San Francisco PD composite artist, because this is the same signature as we've talked about before as the signature that is done on the sighting of the Zodiac at Presidio in San Francisco the night of Paul Stein's murder. Now, actually, I mean, if we consider it in that fashion, this composite was actually done before the composite. So who is this individual that has his hands on both? Either way, this was put into the newspaper, and I have an audio clip now. We're going to hear what Bryan Hartnell has to say about the hood. Are we playing that clip?
Well, the pictures are in the paper. This last one that they put out, I think, is probably as accurate as any that they have put up. Since this last threat about the school bus, we don't know what's going to happen, what his mode of operation is or anything. I have no malice, I mean, in my heart against him. I just don't want this to happen again to anyone else.
And I want to play that one more time, just so everybody catches it. Can you do that for me, Juan?
Well, the pictures are in the paper. This last one that they put out, I think, is probably as accurate as any that they have put up. Since this last threat about the school bus, we don't know what's going to happen, what his mode of operation is or anything. I have no malice, I mean, in my heart against him. I just don't want this to happen again to anyone else.
All right, so that kind of gave me goosebumps, and that's usually what happens when the truth is told. So there you have it. You have Bryan Hartnell well before the Zodiac book by Grace Smith, where his rendition of that square-topped paper bag style hood ever appeared or ever became a notion in anybody's mind. No doubt that what Bryan Hartnell is talking about in the newspaper is the composite that is drawn and that we see here that he'd given a description of in regards to the hood. Again, extremely similar to what Dennis Kaufman found in that PA system. So let's go back here. And here we go. We have pretty much covered a lot about the hood, so I'm just kind of breezed through these. We can see that the hood is in fact square on top, more like I would call the flattened paper bag, not the open square style that Graysmith has fantasized about in his book. Now we do see the clip-on points. There are holes on both sides of the eyes for the clip-on glasses. And we see that there is no nose, no mouth hole. We just have eye holes here. And of course, because this is material, this would then buckle once it was opened up and put around something round. Again, we've talked about this one. We covered it in past podcasts, but it doesn't hurt to show again what it was that Dennis had found and how that was consistent. I mean, look at this here being cut off. So we just have these points that meet down on the shoulder. That's what's being described there. And of course, again, that Zodiac symbol. Here's some more full pictures of it. Not only is Dennis removing it from the PA system that Jack had made a particular call for on several times, asking Dennis about it, wanting to make sure he still had it. If there was a chance he had to get rid of it, he wanted it returned. There was a big to-do that was actually made about this hood by Jack, and that's the only reason why Dennis ever opted to open this thing up. Otherwise, it was just a piece of junk he'd been carrying around with him for far too long after he had obtained all of the belongings of Jack from a shed in Arizona. So to my knowledge, Dennis had this PA system for 3 years before he ever opened it up. And trust me, I've been to his storage sheds, I've been to his houses, I've been to all of the places where any of Jack's belongings have been, and it was just an absolute disarray. I mean, he just looked like a pack rat. There was nothing, properly boxed. There was nothing, no rhyme nor reason to the stacking of this stuff. Like, it was pretty much looked like it had just been literally thrown right on into the shed with no organization. So it would have, I think, been challenging for Dennis to stay on top of this PA system or have any inclination that this PA system was anywhere near important to Jack, unless Jack had actually called him as many times as Dennis said about that PA system. So he did eventually end up opening it up. He said that he got it partially opened. We can see just to this degree. He saw this material. You can see it right here poking out as he slides the back of the PA system out. And the second that he saw that, he said he immediately closed it back up and he broke out the camera to record the removal of this piece of evidence. It has then since been turned over to the FBI. It has not been returned. It has been confirmed as genuine material that predates the Zodiac murders. So again, I mean, you're talking about Dennis having to go out and find some fabric that was older than, well, in 2008 when he found this, it would have made it approximately 40 years old. He would have had to have gone around someplace and then talk about making it look as old as this piece actually looks. We've got all of the proper fold marks that appears as though it has been stored and folded for quite some time in that manner. So that's a whole lot of setup for those that want to accuse Dennis of somehow manufacturing this. I just don't believe that that's possible. Another piece of evidence that hits home really large for Sandy Betts is this clothesline, because as we know, she has discussed the dropping of clothesline on her front porch, her clothesline going missing during some of these crimes. Again, we don't know if this was the Zodiac taunting her because she was so outspoken in regards to Darlene Ferrin and who she was, and they may not have liked what Sandy Betts had to say. Either way, we know that at Lake Berryessa, the killer forced Cecelia to tie up Bryan first, and then the suspect tied up Cecelia. The Lake Berryessa clothesline used to tie up the victims is found over here in the right-hand corner. Charles Terrence, which is Jack's son, says that Jack carried pre-cut pieces of rope under 3 feet, which were never enough to actually tie anything down. In fact, it's right here, an excerpt out of Stephen Dewhurst's book, where he says he used to carry pre-cut lengths of rope shorter than 3 feet in his vehicle all the time that were not long enough to tie stuff down with. That's kind of a strange recollection for a child to have, because that would stand out in my mind, especially if you couldn't tie anything down with it or do anything with it. What would be the purpose of carrying those around? Extra shoestrings, maybe? Now in let's see, this is Graysmith's book, and I wanted to just point out that in the conversation that the suspect had, and it seems like they had quite a lengthy conversation, there's a lot going on there. There is a reference to Black Dahlia, just like there was in the Sherry Jo Bates murder. So he made the reference in the Sherry Jo Bates confession letter that time is short. And for me, that is a connection between the watches that were found at the scenes of the crime and the Black Dahlia crime, in which case Elizabeth Short was the one of the victims during that era or strings of killings. So let's go ahead and revisit what Hartnell supposedly told Graysmith, and hopefully Graysmith reported it correctly without adding too much of his information in it. He states that the stocky man wore a lightweight blue-black windbreaker over a reddish-black wool shirt. This close, Bryan could see that the cross circle symbol was sewn on. Now that confirms it's not paint. So you go back and forth and you see these different indicators that want to tell you how this hood was designed. And just recently I read where somebody claimed it was painted on. But here in Graysmith's book, he's actually saying that it was sewn on. The man's hands were hidden by black gloves. So now this is the first time we hear about gloves, because in both of the descriptions that Hartnell gave, he indicated he didn't believe the man was wearing gloves. But now we have black gloves that are showing up. And he had on baggy pleated slacks of the old-fashioned type. Bryan judged him to be between 5 foot 10 inches and 6 foot. So now how did the description become 5'8" to 5'10"? I'm not sure. But 5'10" is obviously going to help Jack to fit into the identification. Bryan judged him to be between 5 foot 10 inches and 6 foot 1 or 2 inches, and to weigh between 225 and 250 pounds. Bryan was a poor judge of height because of his own extraordinary tallness. He fumbled quickly in his pockets for money and keys. "I've only got a little," he said, and handed over the last of the money he had along with the keys to the VW. The masked intruder pocketed the change and tossed the keys on the blanket, then put the gun in the holster. So here we have that ruse that he wants to rob him. He wants his car, but then he doesn't even take the car. And that to me takes me back to like the lipstick killings and the John Benet Ramsey ransom note, where they're stating that they're willing to ransom and give the child back for money, but in fact the child is already dead before the ransom notes are even found. So again, he's telling them he wants one thing, he's doing another, so it's obviously not about money. It says that the masked intruder pocketed the change, tossed the keys on the blanket, then put the gun away in the holster. Bryan thought maybe the guy really does need help. Then he said, "There's no strings attached. I don't have any money right now, but if you need help that badly, I can help you out in another way, maybe." "No," said the stranger. "Time is running short." So here we have a statement that is made directly to Bryan Hartnell about, I believe, Black Dahlia, time being an effort. This kind of also plays back into Terry Batcher's assertion that they were strategic stabbings to these victims that would allow them to remain alive long enough, if not to survive, in order to report back the things that he had said and the mask that he wore. Time is running short is, again, falls right in line with Sherry Jo Bates and Black Dahlia. "I'm an escaped convict from Deer Lodge, Montana. I've killed a prison guard there. I have stolen a car and nothing to lose. I'm flat broke." "Well, man," said Bryan, "wouldn't you rather be stuck on a stealing charge than a threat of homicide?" "Just don't start playing hero on me," said the man. "Don't try to grab the gun." "I didn't really figure the gun was loaded," Bryan told me later. "I always thought it was empty. I heard a lot of times that this is what they do just as a bluff, but I decided not to call his bluff." Bryan told the man, "You're really wasting time with me. I got a billfold and this much change, and that's it. I talked all kinds of weird stuff. He told me just weird shit. I was taking a sociology class You're talking about a sophomore in college, never really run into a real life criminal. Gee, this guy was nothing to worry about. He wanted just money. I told him all I had was 26 cents and he never ended up taking anything. So he didn't take his money, he didn't take his keys. If I remember right, I gave him the keys and somehow they got left behind. He talked about how the car he had was hot. I thought he meant he had a very fast car and commented to him about it, and he said it was stolen. He talked about being in prison and about contacting me. We talked for quite a while. The hooded man detached the 2.5 to 3 foot lengths of clothesline. So now he's even actually describing the length of this clothesline that is a match to what Charles Terrence indicated his father carried, that Jack carried in the back of his car. The stocky man's knife was even with Bryan's eyes, and he stared at it, trying to fix as many details as possible in his mind. The blade was about 3/4 of an inch to 1 inch wide and 11 to 12 inches long, maybe a bayonet or a bread knife. Wow, that is a drastic difference for anybody who knows knives to go from bayonet to bread knife. I mean, totally different types of knives. And now it states it's with a hardwood handle decorated with 2 brass rivets. White surgical cotton tape, 1 inch wide, was wrapped around the handle, and the whole knife was fitted into a sheath of wood. The blade was sharpened on both sides. So maybe that's what gave him the bayonet style, but to call it a bayonet definitely gives you a visual of something completely different than a homemade knife that was sharpened on both sides. Had Bryan ever seen The Most Dangerous Game, he would have recognized it as a good copy of the knife Count Zeroff wore on his black hunting outfit. So maybe this is another mimicry of some type of movie or media that the Zodiac has followed. We do know, and we will see further down the line, how he uses media, movies, books, and other things in his crimes. The killer said, "Lie face down on the ground," said the hooded man. "I'm going to have to tie you up." Bryan defiantly stood up and was ordered back down on the blanket. I kid you not, Robert," Bryan said later. "I became really annoyed at the thought of being hogtied. I just really annoyed, and I argued with him about it and thought, not really sensibly, but more in the neighborhood of cops and robbers, about getting the gun away. I always felt the way he handled the gun, I could have gotten it. The only reason I didn't was I figured it really was a highly optional thing to do, and if I screwed up and somebody got hurt, I was going to get blamed for being a hero or trying to be a hero." So very, very interesting. Let's see here, description of the knife. So I actually brought forth something that was a description that was later given by a friend of Nikki Benedict, who had seen what I believe they believe might have been the suspect involved in her murder, and he described a knife. Now, of course, this one does look more, or tends to look more, like a bread knife, but it also shows the rivets and the wooden handle. So I thought that was extremely interesting, because I do believe that there's a possibility Nikki Benedict could also have been one of the Riverside area killings that was involved with the Zodiac. Now, as to the prison statement, the victims reported the suspect said, "I want your money and your car keys. I'm an ex-con from Montana Deer Lodge." That has been found to not be true. There was no one that had escaped. There was no prison guard that was killed. So we now have to look to why the Zodiac would refer or defer to Montana Deer Lodge, of all places, to have escaped from. So I kind of did a really quick check on it, and this is what I found out about it. Now, this prison was Conley's downfall, it says. In addition to the problems Conley had with prisoners, and then I'm thinking Conley obviously is the warden at the time, the community began to complain of his use of the prisoners and the office of warden for personal gain. When he arrived in Deer Lodge, he had been a lowly deputy, but within 20 years had risen to one of the most powerful men in the region. Through the years, he had become personal friends with William A. Clark, and through him, the Anaconda Copper Mining Company, a subsidiary of John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil. So that's why that stood out to me. Hi, Nolan.
Hi, Nanette. Sorry I'm late. I've got a hearing at 8:30, a DV hearing.
Well, we still got about 10 minutes here. I'm just getting into
I wanted to check in.
Some extremely interesting information in regards to a statement that the Zodiac killer made when he stated to Bryan Hartnell and Cecelia Shepard that he was an escaped ex-con from Montana Deer Lodge. So I went in and I researched this particular prison, and it had so many interesting things, including connections to John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil. Now, we know there's an oil connection, obviously, in the Zodiac cases. John D. Rockefeller, that puts us right into the middle of the mob, right?
Yep. Anaconda Copper, too, was one of the copper companies that was nationalized by Salvador Allende in the early 70s in Chile, and Kennecott and Anaconda. And then, so basically, the CIA and Henry Kissinger and Nixon just plotted to assassinate him and put Pinochet in power in Chile.
So they were going to assassinate the owner of Anaconda Copper Mining Company?
No, the Anaconda's leaders, along with the CIA and Nixon and Kissinger, decided to assassinate the socialist, popularly elected president of Chile.
Oh.
And they put in a military ruler after that, Pinochet.
Well, these people are obviously, I don't know if this is his subtle way then of referring back to this whole entire group of maybe handlers or people he's involved with, but bringing up this particular, I'm going to continue with the information because it gets very interesting about this particular prison. Conley moved up the social stratus with his marriage to Missoula, Montana socialite, while using prison labor to construct the prison itself, roads for the state, and buildings for the state institutions. He had also found a way to have the inmates build him an expensive warden's residence across Main Street from the prison, a hunting lodge on the shores of his private lake, and another for Thomas McTagg, and a racetrack where he ran his own thoroughbreds. He also used the produce of the prison ranch and farm to entertain guests like Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Secretary of Treasury William Gibbs McAdoo, several Montana governors, and of course, Copper King William Clark, and a number of directors of the Anaconda Mining Company. At these events, he commonly used prisoners as cooks, waiters, and servants. So he was basically using this prison as his own, like, military of help.
Plantation, like slave labor.
Right.
Like plantation. Yep.
Warden of the Montana State Prison was not the only office Frank Conley held. He was voted mayor of Deer Lodge from 1892 to 1893 and 1895 to 1903, and again from 1907 to 1929, a position he held for 8 years after being removed from his duties as warden. The man responsible for Conley's downfall was Governor Joseph M. Dixon. Dixon took office under the promise to remove the powerful Anaconda Mining Company from state politics, and upon hearing that the warden of the state prison was heavily involved with the company, he launched a series of investigations and audits which laid bare the extent of Warden Conley's corruption between 1908 and 1921. Some points Dixon's auditor found were appropriating beef, assorted groceries and produce, cream and butter for his private use in the amount of $8,300. That's a lot back then. Using over 500,000 tons of state coal for his private residence, using and maintaining 13 private autos at state expense, running up gas, oil, and maintenance, selling to the state for use in the prison, dairy products and beef product produced by the herd at market rates. Dixon wasted no time in bringing Conley to trial on charges of corruption. The judge, however, could find no written statute which fully defined the relationship the state of Montana shared with Frank Conley, and so could find no laws Conley had broken. That's a go figure. In the words of the judge, every act of Conley was in the interest of the state of Montana. Now, this really kicks me. Yesterday, I watched something on Netflix called Take Care of Maya. And it is a case where John Hopkins Children's Hospital had actually removed a child from her parents, indicating that they were abusing her in some fashion. They withheld her from her parents for over 3 months while her situation deteriorated and got worse. Even though the parents kept telling the hospital what it was they needed to do, the hospital found them to be intrusive and belligerent and everything that would cause somebody to think that they were abusing their child in their eyes. Either way, the mother of this child eventually ended up committing suicide because she couldn't handle it after almost 100 days of her daughter being in pain, deteriorating, nothing she could do. She had been kicked out of the hospital. She could not visit, see, was barely able to speak to her daughter, and ended up taking her own life. Now, in the counter lawsuit that's occurring now, Johns Hopkins hired a judge, a sitting judge, to act as their attorney. Obviously, high power, big money. But it turns out that the case has been indefinitely stayed on appeal until they decide some part of evidence. So instead of going to trial, they are indefinitely holding it until the appeals court makes their decision, which is just absolutely disgusting. And from what I can take at this point, it's been going on for more than 8 or 10 years, this case. And it's just not getting to trial because Johns Hopkins has been able to keep it dangling and over their head. And as far as I want to say 2022, that's I believe when they indicated the stay was going to be indefinite until the appeals court had rendered some decision about going forward. And the crazy thing is that the Johns Hopkins had been billing the insurance company for the precise disease they said that the daughter didn't have, that they accused the parents of abusing the daughter over. They were receiving insurance funds for that disease, but not treating the daughter for that particular illness. Is that not insane?
That's crazy. Was it a state appeals court or federal?
I don't know. I would have to go back.
I would think it would be state. That way they'd have more local control to make sure things didn't go forward.
And that's happening right here and now today. I mean, this is obviously still a case that is ongoing. The poor little girl is, kept from her mother for over 100 days at this hospital. Her mother commits suicide, so she'll never see her mother again. She's attempting to sue for all the abuse. And I've been a victim of what she went through. She was in deposition stating that the nurses and the doctors were calling her a liar, telling other people she wasn't in pain. She was making it up. It was all in her head. And I've had that happen to me at Kaiser. I eventually actually contacted the legal department at Kaiser, and they paid me out about $3,000 for it. But Kaiser did basically the same thing when I walked in stating I was having an asthma attack and I needed a breathing treatment. They wanted to send me home with cough medicine. At 5 months pregnant, I couldn't breathe. I told them that this was something that I had gone through as a child, that I just need a breathing treatment, I'd be fine. They said everything that they told this girl. I was lying. I needed to get out of the emergency room. They needed the bed for somebody else. And 10 hours later, I returned with a torn lining around my esophagus and my lungs because they didn't listen to me when I was trying to tell them how I needed to be treated. So it is a very real thing, and they have lots of power, and there's just no way to go back on them or to get another doctor to side with you, because I was told by one of the doctors at Kaiser that there's only 3 medical insurance carriers, and if you tell on another doctor, you won't get insured by these other carriers and you won't be able to practice. How scary is that? That you can't get somebody, that's willing to tell the truth. So
it's like the mafia.
It is. It basically is. Yeah. Now it says that goes also back to what the vaccine court, like you can't win against being harmed by one of these vaccines more than $250,000 in any one given instance. And in some cases, like with this COVID vaccine, they were given free reign. There was going to be nobody to come back on them in the event that it caused any harm. Well, although stripped of the influential office of warden, Conley continued as mayor of Deer Lodge until 1929 and lived in the city until his death in Butte on 5th of March, 1939. I found that it got even more interesting with this Jerry Miles guy, who seems to be part of some of the information that I read is that he had some connections with the Channel 9 news company out of New York. And I'll just cover that real quick. So almost 10 years after Warden Floyd Powell resigned, Governor Forrest Anderson, who had been instrumental in negotiations which led to the end of the P riot in 1957, managed to get the state legislature to approve. Oh, never mind. I thought I had 5 more minutes. We'll continue this because this is going to get into where this prison actually ends up being what most would refer to as boss inmate, where they literally, the inmates ran the facility and they could get anything, do anything, be anything they wanted, including a boss, to the degree that most of the prison guards and staff would allow them to continue and behave. And that's a great story on Jerry Miles, who's related to the Grote family. So we'll come back to that next week. Thank you for stepping in, Nolan. If you want to be here for next week, I'll send you off that link and we can see you on next Friday.
Yes, I'll be on time next week.
Not a problem. All right, everybody, have a wonderful weekend and we will see you next week. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Oh,